Perhaps some of the most consequential decisions that Nintendo has made in recent years will soon come to the surface. You see, while the price point, the specification, and the game library of the Nintendo Switch 2 system will all be crucial to its future, one other critical aspect for any business is to minimize ongoing costs, and one of the major outlays for consumer electronics are on precious metals, metals vital to the working of a video game console, but which can be tricky to source. The Nintendo Switch uses gold, tantalum, tin, tungsten, and cobalt, among others, and the company has received praise in 2024 for managing to avoid using sites of international conflict while sourcing these precious metals. With a new generation dawning, there also comes a new opportunity to review their system's design and the prospect that Nintendo could find ways to utilize other metals or at least minimize their reliance on scarce and expensive minerals. So, why are these metals important? How are they used? What are the risks with their usage? And what changes might Nintendo make going forward? Like, subscribe, and settle in for a Nintendo Forecast deep dive into Nintendo and precious metals. So first, let's start by exploring these five metals, their uses, their risks, and their alternatives. First up is gold. Gold is frequently used in printed circuit boards alongside copper for its conductivity. Traditionally a store of wealth, its value has oscillated over time as investors have sought to put their money where it has greater potential to accrue interest, but the gold price has increased inexorably in the last 10 years, and particularly in recent times, often in anticipation of further economic shocks to the world economy, and partly because of aggressive moves by countries like China to acquire gold as part of a long-term strategy to dethrone the American dollar as the world's foremost reserve currency. This pressure on prices means that even the tiny amounts used in machines can add up to big costs for sizable manufacturing runs. Apple managed to recover £2,204 of gold from recycled electronics in 2015. Of course, what comes up may come down, and confidence in the market may see the gold price lower again, but over the very long term, gold remains a significant store of wealth and so a major factor in gold prices. It may be possible to replace gold with gold-plated copper or even using nickel plating. There are alternatives such as the cheaper silver, but this can oxidize, meaning that protective coatings are needed, so it is less useful in a circuit board. While there is pressure to reduce gold, however, not all minerals are similarly risky. Tantalum, a metal used for managing power distribution in batteries and for capacitors, generally rises at a stable pace but can spike when there are particular tech booms, such as the 5G rollout in 2019 to 2021. Tin is another metal which is often used to bind electronic components to the switch's circuit board, as well as being used in lead-free solder. Again, the tin price can be volatile, but this time not just due to demand peaks for solder, but also because of supply issues, with China being a large producer of tin, and Reuters noting that more than half the global supply of tin as of March 2024 was coming out of just one country, Indonesia. However, relying on just one source has caused issues with abrupt delays to production caused by environmental rules, illegal mining scandals, and permit provision. Still, tin is relatively abundant, and tin reserves have been built up again in recent years, meaning that this is probably not a metal that Nintendo will wish to substitute in the Switch 2. Then we have tungsten, used potentially for vibration motors such as the rumble in the Joy-Cons, where there seems to be a strong reliance on China for production. It is also one of the more difficult to substitute, since tungsten's hardness and high density make it especially useful, and while other alternatives such as zinc or even steel exist, using these could alter the user experience, a very different thing once the machine is in production, although still possible when they are changing to a new generation anyway. Tungsten may represent one of the riskier metals for Nintendo going forward, as reportedly tungsten is being widely utilized in the growing robotics industry. Finally, we have cobalt, which currently seems to have a supply glut due to overproduction in the Democratic Republic of Congo and a decline in electronic vehicle batteries. Cobalt seems to be used primarily for battery technologies. While lowering cobalt content would cut costs, Switch 2 will need a robust battery, and so it seems unlikely that this will be substituted anytime soon, despite the Cobalt Institute asserting that for countries pursuing net zero, 3 times more cobalt would be required, meaning that in the next quarter century prices might be expected to treble. So, apart from costs, what are the issues around these minerals? Nintendo's corporate social responsibility guidelines confirm, and I quote, "Minerals that become a source of finances for organizations associated with human rights violations such as child labor, environmental destruction, and the inhumane use of military force are not used in our products." The company has an exhaustive list of conformance smelters from a broad range of countries, including China, Taiwan, Japan, and Indonesia, all the way to Bolivia, Brazil, Kazakhstan, Switzerland, Uzbekistan, Germany, Italy, and the USA. In May of 2024, Nintendo of America's Doug Bowser issued a report entitled Forced Labor and Child Labor in Supply Chain Report 2024, which reiterated their corporate position on ethical procurement, including their due diligence, training procedures, risk identification, and self-assessment of their internal processes. Competition is another key consideration for Nintendo. Nintendo is a large player in the consumer electronics industry compared to many, but compared to Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, and even Sony, they are minnows in the pond. Demand spikes in products could lead to companies moving aggressively to secure materials that Nintendo require for production of their systems, leaving them scrambling. And I have yet to even mention the issues of conflict, from trade disputes to war, which would stress supply chains and could lead to abrupt price spikes. All of these are issues that Nintendo will continue to wrestle with in the months and years ahead, but 2025 represents their biggest opportunity to do something about it. Designing a system is essentially a bet on the continued availability and reasonable price of key minerals, and as the cases of gold and tantalum particularly have shown, these can't be trusted to remain at the same kinds of prices for the long term. Of course, at this point, the decisions will be locked in, and we will just have to see what minerals Nintendo are sourcing when the information is released to the public. But if they have decided to diversify their mineral use, it might give us a glimpse into where they perceive their risks to be. Availability of raw materials also has a good chance of affecting mid-generation replacement choices, whether making them more likely because the company needs to graduate players to models with less problematic manufacturing processes, or affecting the choices of what they focus on and develop. If tungsten is required for haptic feedback and becomes limited, then it is possible that this is something that could be de-emphasized in the lower-end alternative models at least. And of course, while none of these elements are huge proportions of the console's cost, if any one or all of them were to spike dramatically, it might lead us to draw conclusions about the probability of price changes for the Switch 2 over the course of its lifespan. It might not be the changes that will create the biggest headlines, but I, for one, will be interested to see what, if any, developments Nintendo have pioneered with their mineral use as we go into the next generation. If you enjoyed this video, do check out these others on the screen right now. Please do like, share, comment, subscribe, and check out the Patreon. Meanwhile, I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.